When my dad moved into long-term care, he was 92 years old, and it was the hardest decision that my sister and I had ever made. It was influenced by the fact that he had, on 2 separate occasions, broken his hip, and he never really totally recovered from a functional perspective after the second injury. And then, in my personal opinion, I think the hospital admissions and that experience actually contributed in a way to the advancement of his dementia. So at that point, there were huge risks in leaving him alone. My dad was very religious. He was brought up Catholic and stayed with that his whole life. And up to the point he moved into long-term care, he was still going to Mass every Sunday. And when he was able, he was going every day. So that was really, really important to him. I think it's important to appreciate that though certain religions are represented in long-term care settings, I saw a gap in addressing the spiritual needs of the residents in those settings. Not everyone is religious. Not everyone believes in a supreme being, but they may be spiritual in other ways, and need to sort of talk about what it feels like or what their experience is as they are in that final phase of life.
I think in terms of spiritual care specifically, we often go to the clouds and to the heavens, right? And we think it's about a higher purpose, but it's also about really discovering our true self. It's an inner path as much as it is a transcendent path. It's really to understand who you are as an individual, particularly in a long-term care setting where we do have things like people losing their memory, losing that sense of who they were, losing their abilities in terms of the things and the roles that really defined them in their life. They're no longer working. They're no longer, able to do the hobbies or the things that they enjoyed. Where am I going, after this journey here on earth? What are the things that have mattered the most to me when I look over my shoulder, in terms of what are those connections of meaning and purpose that have really been important that I want to maintain? So I think a lot of people are in a position of both looking forward to, okay, what's life, what does it have for me from here on in, and then also maybe into the afterlife, but then also looking back and sort of taking stock and saying, okay, what are the things that are the most important to me? My family. Well, I want to really make sure that that's maintained as I go through this final journey of my life.
If you think about it in long-term care, when people move into that setting, it is the final phase of their journey in life. And even that transition is it's very challenging. It's challenging for the person who moves in. It's challenging for the family. It was very difficult for my sister and I. And even having somebody to support you around what that means emotionally, spiritually, whether you're religious or not, is really important. And also having the relationship. These kinds of conversations are not one-offs. They happen over a period of time.
I think we want an individual that's embedded, that's professionally trained, and is also able to really traverse across those different traditions, and to people who are very much seekers, who are not really concerned about labeling themselves with a particular ticky box on a survey as sort of, this is my spiritual background. But they may raise their hands and say, yeah, questions around meaning and purpose, they've become more important to me as I've been admitted to this care home. I would like to talk to somebody who's a human being about this, that I feel comfortable with, who is non-judgmental, and I think that's what you get when you talk to a spiritual health practitioner.
I used to play some music that was really important to my dad, and even playing kind of spiritual music can be important. And even for somebody who isn't religious, there's music that has a spiritual element to it. But so there's all these transitions over the years when you're there. And so having somebody who's a constant, so it's not somebody coming in and out and you have a one-time conversation about your spiritual needs. It's somebody that you develop a relationship with over time. And I always thought that that type of role in long-term care, a constant role, would be of real value.
I think in terms of the integration of spiritual care into long-term care, if I'm being completely honest, I actually think it's pretty piecemeal. Usually you find a dedicated spiritual health practitioner in long-term care homes that are affiliated or run by a particular religious denomination. I think that is the challenge, is there's no sort of standard of care, as it were, or expectations. So it really is, you roll the dice. If this is important for you, you can kind of maybe do some initial sort of assessment before you admit your loved one into that facility. But most of the time you show up and you're kind of lucky, to be honest with you, if you have that person.
When I think about what an ideal world would be in long-term care from a spiritual perspective, I guess I think of starting in the beginning and thinking of that whole continuum of care, that journey from the time somebody enters that world to when they leave it, usually as they die. So in the beginning, you're helping to welcome that resident into that environment. You're helping to support the family and the resident through, which is in many ways a real spiritual crisis, because it really is like saying, this is the last part of their journey, it's the last part of my journey, or it's the last part of my dad's journey or my mom's journey, and that's hard. And that brings up a whole lot of issues around spirituality and beliefs and values. Having somebody talk that through or talk to you about that, what that means, it almost gets into the meaning of life for you and the meaning of life for that person. And I think that the continuity is important, because you can't, not everyone is comfortable revealing all of that in the beginning, but they might over time. They might over time as the trust develops, and they're maybe okay with saying about religion is really important to me, or it's not important to me at all, or I don't know what I believe in. Having somebody to talk to about that, whether you're the person living in long-term care or their family, I think is really critical.
One of the ways that we can advocate for the improvement of spiritual care and long-term care is to actually engage patients and their family members in terms of having their voice, which is one of the loudest voices when it really comes down to it at the end of the day. But unfortunately, we often don't give them the microphone in order to be able to speak and to advocate. So I think that is one way, is to actually engage patients and their family members to really hear from them in terms of what's important to them specifically.
I think it's really important that at the end of life, as somebody dies or when they die, that that we appreciate that this was their home. It is their home. It's their community. And in that community, they have friends. They've developed relationships over the years, and they want to know that somebody has died. They want to be engaged in the opportunity to say goodbye, to say farewell, to be engaged in any rituals. For example, as the person leaves the home, that they might be part of that journey and accompany them out, because it was their community, there's their friends. And here in the long-term care home, where they've been for sometimes well over a decade, that needs to be acknowledged as well. And I think having somebody dedicated to supporting spiritual care in that home would probably make that sort of thing happen for everybody.
I think it really comes down to how much do we really want to take this family-centered or resident-centered approach to heart. If we really want to take it to heart, well then we've got some tough decisions to make, and I think residents and family members would say we need to be having spiritual care embedded within our long-term care teams. This is something that's important to me. I want to have the availability of this. And it's something that's becoming more and more important to me as I'm suffering from some of the effects of aging and also knowing that I'm going to die one of these days.